It was one of those ordinary evenings, the kind that had been repeating themselves for weeks. The kind of quiet, when you thought nothing special could happen, but you were wrong. I was sitting on the couch in the living room, phone pressed against my ear, caught in a conversation with a friend about something trivial. Homework, plans for the weekend, the usual stuff. It wasn't anything particularly interesting, but the conversation felt like a safe space to escape from the discomfort in the house. Mom had passed away when I was young, and life had continued on as usual, or so I thought. Dad had remarried a few years ago, and I tried my best to adjust. My stepmom, Elena, was a kind woman, but there was always an unspoken distance between us. I never really considered her my mother. She was just another figure in the house, someone who tried but never quite bridged the gap. She was beautiful, in a quiet way, with an elegance that reminded me of the women in magazines, polished, poised, and seemingly flawless. I'd never quite been able to relate to her. Maybe it was the age gap. Maybe it was the fact that I was still grieving my real mother, even years after she'd passed. But either way, she had always felt like an outsider to me. That evening, as I spoke to my friend about nothing in particular, I noticed Elena walk past the living room. She was heading toward the kitchen, her dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders. I hadn't really thought much of her movements until I heard her stop in the doorway, pausing for a moment before she turned back toward me. I was still talking, but I couldn't help but notice her standing there, her eyes trained on me as she lightly ran her fingers through her hair. It wasn't unusual for her to be in the kitchen at that hour, preparing dinner or doing something in the house. But something about her presence in that moment made me feel uneasy. The air felt thick, charged, as if something was about to happen that I didn't fully understand. My heart skipped a beat as I suddenly became hyper-aware of everything. The sound of the phone in my hand, the rhythm of my breath, the way Elena was standing so still. I didn't understand why she didn't just walk away. Why was she lingering there? I glanced at her, half expecting her to continue with whatever she was doing. But instead, she stood still for a beat longer. Then, almost as if she was unaware of my gaze, she began to tie her hair up into a neat bun. The movement was slow, deliberate. There was something oddly intimate about the gesture, the way her fingers twisted the strands, gathering them with careful precision. It should have been a normal, mundane action, but in that moment, it felt like it was happening in slow motion. I wasn't sure why, but my stomach churned uncomfortably. I turned my attention back to my phone call, trying to push the strange feeling aside, but my mind kept drifting back to her. The soft rustle of her hair as she gathered it into a bun. The quiet swish of the fabric of her dress. It was as if she was performing this simple task just for me, a performance in the background of my conversation, and I couldn't figure out why it felt so significant. I suddenly realized that my friend was still talking, but I wasn't listening. I had drifted too far into my own thoughts. I quickly excused myself from the conversation, telling them I'd call them back later. My eyes flicked to Elena once more, but she had finished tying her hair and was walking toward the kitchen again, her back to me as she busied herself with something on the counter. I could have sworn I saw a brief flash of something in her posture, something that felt almost vulnerable, but I quickly shook the thought from my mind. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the image of Elena tying her hair. It lingered like a cloud I couldn't dispel, hanging over my thoughts. What had made me feel so uneasy? Why did her actions seem to have so much weight? It wasn't until later that night that I started to put the pieces together. It was late, and I was heading upstairs to my room when I saw the light in the living room flicker. It was Elena again, sitting by herself, a glass of wine in her hand. I wasn't sure why, but I stopped in my tracks. Maybe I should have just gone to my room and left her alone, but something about her loneliness felt strange. I hesitated for a moment before stepping into the living room. "You're still up?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked up from her glass, surprised but quickly masking it with a soft smile. "I couldn't sleep. I'm just having a drink to unwind." Her smile was warm, but I sensed something was off. There was a quietness to her that I hadn't seen before. "Is everything okay?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Her smile faltered for a brief moment, but she quickly recovered. "Of course," she replied, but there was something in her eyes, a fleeting sadness, or maybe guilt, that I couldn't quite place. We sat in silence for a while. I wasn't sure what had prompted me to stay, but I was beginning to sense that there was more to her than I had realized. It wasn't that I didn't care about her. It was just that she had always kept a distance, even from Dad. I'd always felt like I didn't belong with her, but tonight, I wasn't sure what was happening between us. "Your dad's been working a lot lately," she said, breaking the silence. "Yeah, I know." I shifted uncomfortably, unsure of where this conversation was going. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Elena continued, "about how things have been changing." Her fingers tightened around the wine glass, and I saw her gaze drop to the floor, as though she was unsure how to continue. I stared at her, not understanding what she was talking about. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath before meeting my eyes again. "About us, about this family, about the way things have always been." My heart raced as the tension between us thickened. It was as though she was trying to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I stood up suddenly, feeling an overwhelming need to leave before I understood something I wasn't ready to face. "I'm going to bed," I said quickly. But as I turned away, I heard her voice behind me, low and almost pleading. "I'm not like the others." I paused, unsure of what to say. I glanced back at her, but she was looking at her glass again, avoiding my gaze. I didn't know what she meant, but I was starting to feel that the tension between us wasn't just in my head. There was something unspoken, something that had shifted in the air since that night she had tied her hair. The next few days passed uneventfully, but the weight of that night stayed with me. I kept thinking about Elena's words, "I'm not like the others," and the strange way she had acted. And then one afternoon, I came home to find her in the living room, crying. I didn't know what to do. The woman who had always been composed, always in control, was broken. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered, almost as if to herself. I didn't ask her to explain, but that moment stayed with me, a quiet turning point. Something had happened in that house, something hidden beneath the surface. It wasn't just my own feelings that had changed. It was hers too. And I wasn't sure how, or when, or why, but I knew that something had shifted between us in ways that would never be fully understood. As days went on, I began to understand the complexity of Elena's situation. She was a woman caught between roles.